Inner speech is the internal monologue that many people experience as a silent voice in their head. It is that constant stream of thoughts that sounds like you're talking to yourself, but without making any noise. This inner voice helps us plan our day, rehearse conversations, and solve problems by converting abstract ideas into structured language. While it feels completely private, researchers have found that the brain activity involved in inner speech is very similar to the activity that occurs when we speak out loud. This internal dialogue often serves as a mental workspace where we can test out different scenarios before we act. For example, if you are preparing for a difficult meeting, you might hear yourself practicing exactly what you want to say. This process uses the same parts of the brain responsible for speech production, such as the Broca area. Interestingly, when people engage in inner speech, their vocal cords often undergo tiny, invisible movements known as subvocalization. It is as if the body is physically preparing to say the words, even though the mind keeps them quiet. Not everyone experiences inner speech in the same way. While some people have a constant, vivid monologue, others think primarily in images, feelings, or abstract concepts without any words at all. This variation is known as the scale of internal representation. For those who do have a strong inner voice, it acts as a tool for self-regulation. By talking ourselves through a stressful moment, we can use language to calm our emotions and stay focused on a task. It turns our private thoughts into a helpful guide that keeps us on track. The tone of your inner speech can have a massive impact on your mental health and confidence. If the voice in your head is supportive and encouraging, it can act as a powerful motivator. However, if it is overly critical, it can lead to increased stress and self-doubt. Because this voice is with us every moment of the day, learning to observe and gently steer our internal monologue is a key part of personal growth. It is not just about what we say to the world, but how we speak to ourselves in the quiet of our own minds. The reason why some people do not have an inner voice is a phenomenon called anendophagia. For these individuals, thoughts do not manifest as audible words or sentences. Instead, they might experience their mental life through a series of vivid images, spatial maps, or pure concepts that have no linguistic form. When they want to plan a meal, they don't hear the words "I should make pasta." Instead, they might see a flash of the kitchen, the texture of the noodles, and the steam from the pot all at once. This shows that the human brain has many different ways to process information, and that language is only one possible tool for thinking. Research suggests that people without an inner voice often perform just as well on logic and memory tests as those who talk to themselves. However, there are some subtle differences in how they tackle certain tasks. For instance, people with a strong inner monologue often use verbal rhyming or word associations to remember lists. Those with anendophagia might rely more on visual patterns or the physical relationship between objects. This diversity in cognitive styles means that two people can solve the exact same problem using completely different mental machinery. For those who do possess a loud inner voice, it is possible to change its tone through a process called cognitive reframing. This involves catching the internal monologue when it becomes harsh or irrational and intentionally substituting a more balanced perspective. If your inner voice says you're going to fail this, you can train it to say you are prepared and will do your best. Over time, this practice actually changes the neural pathways associated with self-talk, making the supportive voice the new default. This is a primary goal of many modern psychological therapies. Another interesting aspect of inner speech is its role in reading. Most people hear a voice in their head as they read a book, which helps them process the rhythm and emotion of the text. This is why you can hear the specific personality of a character in a novel. People who lack this inner voice may read at a faster pace because they do not have to wait for the internal sound to catch up with their eyes. Whether you have a constant narrator or a silent gallery of images, your internal world is a unique environment shaped by the specific way your brain prefers to organize reality. The development of inner speech in children offers a fascinating look at how we learn to think. When toddlers are playing, they often talk out loud to themselves in a process called private speech. You might hear a child say out loud, "Now I put the red block here," as they work. At this stage, their thoughts and their words are the same thing. As they grow older, around age 7 or 8, this external chatter begins to move underground. It becomes quieter and eventually turns into the silent internal monologue we experience as adults. This transition is a critical milestone in cognitive development. By moving speech inside, Children gain the ability to plan their actions without revealing them to others and to regulate their behavior more effectively. It allows for a higher level of self-control, as they can use their inner voice to remind themselves of rules or to stay focused on a difficult puzzle. This suggests that our inner voice is essentially a tool for self-guidance that we simply learn to use without moving our lips. There is also a deep connection between the inner voice and our sense of personal identity. For many, the narrator in their head feels like the core of who they are. This voice tells the story of our lives, connecting our past memories to our future goals. When we reflect on a choice we made, it is the inner voice that helps us weigh our values and decide if we're being true to ourselves. In this way, the monologue is not just a tool for thinking, but a way for us to maintain a consistent sense of self over time. Understanding the mechanics of inner speech helps us realize that our thoughts are not just random occurrences. They are a form of internal communication. Whether your mind is a loud debate hall or a quiet library of images, the way you talk to yourself shapes your reality and your personality. By paying attention to this internal stream, you can become more aware of the stories you tell yourself and how those stories influence your confidence and your interactions with the world. When you learn a second language, your inner speech undergoes a fascinating transformation. At first, you likely translate everything from your native tongue into the new language, meaning your inner voice still speaks your primary language while you search for the right words. However, as you become more fluent, you might notice the new language starting to pop up in your internal thoughts spontaneously. This is a major sign of cognitive integration, showing that your brain has begun to categorize concepts directly in the new language without needing a middleman. Many bilingual people report that they feel like a slightly different person depending on which language their inner voice is using. This is because languages are often tied to specific cultural contexts and emotional memories. For example, someone might feel more assertive and logical when thinking in English, but more emotional or poetic when thinking in their native language. This suggests that the structure of the language we use internally can actually shift our personality traits and how we perceive the world around us. Inner speech also plays a vital role in the creative process. When artists or scientists are working on a problem, they often engage in a silent dialogue with themselves to test out wild ideas or critique their own work. This internal brainstorming allows for a safe space to explore possibilities that might seem silly if spoken out loud. By using your inner voice to ask what-if questions, you can manipulate mental concepts and combine them in new ways, which is the very essence of creative thinking. The connection between the inner voice and creativity is often strongest during the incubation phase, which is the period when you aren't actively thinking about a problem, but your mind is still working on it in the background. You might be taking a shower or walking when your inner voice suddenly presents the solution you were looking for earlier. This shows that even when we aren't paying direct attention, our internal linguistic tools are constantly organizing information and preparing it for us to use. Athletes use their inner voice through a technique called instructional self-talk to enhance their physical performance. During high-pressure moments, an athlete might use their internal monologue to give themselves specific cues, such as keep your elbows in or breathe through the movement. This use of language helps to automate complex physical actions and prevents the brain from being distracted by the roar of a crowd or the pain of exhaustion. By focusing the inner voice on a single technical detail, the athlete can maintain a high level of precision even under extreme stress. Beyond just technical cues, motivational self-talk is used to boost endurance and power. When a runner feels like they cannot go any further, their inner voice might repeat a simple phrase like "you have more in the tank" or "just one more mile." This internal encouragement actually changes the perception of effort in the brain. Research shows that positive self-talk can lower the perceived exertion of an activity, making it feel physically easier to continue. It is as if the inner voice acts as a governor that can either limit or expand the body's physical capabilities. The inner voice also undergoes strange changes during dreaming and deep sleep. In the dream state, your internal monologue can become fragmented or illogical, reflecting the chaotic nature of the dreaming brain. You might find yourself having a conversation with a dream character where the words make perfect sense in the moment, but seem like nonsense once you wake up. This happens because the parts of the brain that handle logical structure and grammar are less active during sleep, allowing the inner voice to wander into more surreal and abstract territory. Even during the transition into sleep, known as the hypnagogic state. Many people experience bursts of inner speech that feel like they're coming from someone else. These are called auditory hypnagogic hallucinations. You might hear your name being called or a random sentence being spoken in your mind as you drift off. This is a normal part of the brain shutting down its external sensors and shifting toward internal processing. It shows that the inner voice is a flexible tool that reflects our mental state, whether we are wide awake on a playing field or slowly fading into sleep. In meditation and mindfulness practices, the goal is often to change your relationship with your inner voice rather than trying to silence it completely. Many people find that when they sit in silence, their internal monologue becomes even louder, jumping from one worry to the next. This is often called monkey mind. Through practice, you learn to observe these thoughts as if they were clouds passing in the sky. Instead of getting swept away by the sentence, "I'm so stressed," you learn to label it by thinking, "I'm having a thought about stress." This small shift creates a mental distance that prevents the inner voice from overwhelming your emotions. By practicing this observation, you can actually slow down the frequency of your inner speech. Research on long-term meditators shows decreased activity in the default mode network, which is the part of the brain that generates self-referential thoughts and mind wandering. As this area quiets down, the inner voice becomes less intrusive. This creates a state of mental clarity where you can choose which thoughts to engage with and which to let go. It transforms the inner voice from a relentless master into a useful tool that you can pick up or set down whenever you wish. There's also a fascinating link between the inner voice and the way we experience time. When your internal monologue is very active, such as when you're worrying about the future or analyzing the past, time often feels like it is dragging or feels cluttered. However, when you are in a state where the inner voice is quiet, such as during intense exercise or deep focus, you may experience time dilation. Without the inner narrator constantly marking the passage of moments with words like "what time is it" or "how much longer," the brain processes reality in a more direct and continuous flow. This relationship explains why time seems to fly when we are happy and moves slowly when we are bored or anxious. Boredom often triggers a heavy internal monologue as the brain searches for stimulation, making us acutely aware of every passing second. On the other hand, peak experiences often involve a silencing of the inner critic, allowing us to exist entirely in the present moment. By learning to manage the volume and pace of our inner speech, we can actually influence our subjective experience of how fast or slow our lives are moving.